I became involved in what is very typical for the amateur radio group, which is to come alongside the community as it needs communications help. Races, emergencies, fairs, all sorts of community activities can use communications throughout their facility or wherever they are. And the place where we are right now is one spot on a 100-mile race course from Lake Tahoe to the city of Auburn, California.
I am part of the Sweep Riders of the Sierra. The Sweep Riders of the Sierra is a volunteer riding organization established for communications on the Western States Trail during the Tevis Cup. The sweep teams, composed of 2 to 4 riders with at least one ham radio operator, will follow the final rider on the trail. Our goal is to establish communications with net control and allow ride management to know what is going on at the end of the ride. Each of these sweep teams will attempt to stay within sight of the last rider and radio to net control any problems that arise on the trail, from horses that are lame and need to be let out to horses that have gone off the trail and need people to come in with ropes and vehicles to attempt to rescue them and bring them back on course.
I'm here today to talk about the use of radios on the trail for both the horseback and runners. Very key in keeping track of what was going on the 100-mile trip and the safety of the people who are on the mission. Eric Homa here of Placer County Sheriff's Search and Rescue, formerly, and myself, Placer County Sheriff's Search and Rescue. We've both been team leaders in communications, and he has worked that extensively in the past. And I have to admit, I've never worked communications on the trail. I look to him to tell us what's going on. Some of the tasks that your team performed out there on the trail, what would that be?
Well, we pretty much had staffed every aid station, even from the start line all the way up and across the mountain, all the way to the finish line. So I don't remember how many stations that was, but it was a lot. Mm-hmm. And we would work with the aid station people and keep track of the runners as they came through every step of the way. And we would use when I was involved, amateur radio repeaters that we had installed and maintained at, one was at Donner Ski Ranch, one was in Forest Hill, and one was on the tower at Ferguson right in Auburn. And then we also deployed search and rescue portable repeaters at Duncan Peak Lookout and also at a state parks little hilltop overlooking the river canyon.
What's the benefit of a repeater? What does that bring?
So that allows people on the trail or at the aid stations with their handheld or mobile radios, their transmission reaches the hilltop repeater and gets retransmitted over a much wider range. And then we would have in the morning we had a command vehicle from Lake Tahoe was stationed at Robinson Flat, and then our communications vehicle, or comm van, at the Auburn Dam overlook,
okay,
which was near the finish line. And we had staffing there that was actually keeping track of either writing down or entering in a computer each and every number of the runners that would come across.
Well, originally the radios were citizens band, as you said. Is that?
I understand.
That never went through repeaters or anything.
No, I understand in the 60s they were using CB radios for a short time. And I believe they got involved with ham radio. Jack Crusenberry and I think it was Buzz Labonte which is a familiar name from the restaurant, started using ham radio and got everybody to get their ham radio licenses. And
You called him Buzz. Is that Lou Labonte?
I think so, yes. And so it was a pretty big task to staff every one of those with radio operators. The western states, which went for 30 hours, so that meant you ended up with 3 shifts of people. So, you know, I think at its peak, when we started also using packet radio, digital communications, we probably had as many as 70 volunteers out there, you know, throughout the 30 hours.
We'll come back to packet radio for a moment, but when you've got them deployed for 30 hours, once they get to a location and they have shifts, are they in tents? Are they sleeping there and somebody wakes them up for their next shift?
Not really. You go to your station when you're supposed to come on board. Now, in the very beginning of the run, you know, you've got people at Squaw Valley and all the way up to Cougar Rock and down the other side, but there's nobody really staffing anything in Auburn yet. And it isn't until later in the afternoon where you start staffing at the west end, and on the east end, those people are pretty much done. So it's kind of a moving target as the race progresses. And the Western States race organization, they wanted to know, you know, who's in first place, who's in second place, and so we would report numbers to them so they could have a big signboard up at the finish line that says this person's in first and 2 minutes behind them is this number 2 person. But as a search and rescue organization, we were keeping track of everyone.
Okay.
They gave us a start list of everybody that started, and every step of the way, we were checking the box to make sure they made it. And you know, our mission was not only to provide communications and help, but to keep track. You know, make sure nobody was lost, or if somebody did get lost, we would know long before their, you know, relative called and said, "Hey, we haven't heard from them." You know.
Well, you started to talk about packet radio, and this was something I understand before you got involved, somebody had done something with packet radio. And as I'm going to suggest to people who may not know, this is a pioneering effort of moving data across the amateur radio networks before the internet existed. So what can you say about your involvement with the packet?
So when I was recruited into search and rescue communications, or it was Sheriff's Comm Reserve at the time, I was recruited to help with building and setting up repeaters, but there was already this group that had been operating since the 60s, and there was people in there that were, you know, packet radio was pretty cutting edge in the 80s, and they were trying to implement that. And it was the, you know, back in the day when it was a Tandy computer or you know, something portable. You know, my involvement started with improving or setting up the system, so we had these repeaters in different locations, and we had portable repeaters that we could deploy. You know, the portable repeaters were not ham radio frequencies, they were Sheriff's Department search and rescue frequencies. The other search and rescue teams that participated, like the mounted team or the motorcycle team that would be sweeping trails, were using radios on those frequencies, versus the ham radio operators from the comm team would be on the ham radio repeaters at each checkpoint along the way. So there was a lot going on.
So what would happen with this data once it was put in a packet and sent somewhere?
So at the peak of this operation, we had a database system. We had a station up in Auburn at a private residence above the fairgrounds that was receiving all this data. It went into from a packet device into a computer, into a database program.
Okay.
And so we were able to connect to that database program, like at the finish line, they could actually log in and look up to see, who was in the lead and who was behind, and the whole step of the way.
This is real time.
It was in real time. And, that was early to mid 90s, probably mid 90s that we did that. I'm sure they're still using packet radio now, but we
It certainly has changed, but it was
oh yeah,
amazing use of it back then.
yeah, it was pretty. It was a fun project. It was, cutting edge. It was probably not very common in those days to have that data, and so it was not only a fun electronics and computer programming thing, but all the ham radio operators were excited to use this new technology, this packet radio.
Overall, how many operators did you get involved on the trail?
It took a lot, like 70 of them.
Yeah.
You'd have a checkpoint station where you would have a voice person and a packet person, and maybe even a third person for each shift. So it was a lot of people. It wasn't just the comm team, it was friends of friends and other ham radio operators, and there was a huge push in Placer County Search and Rescue at the time to get other search and rescue volunteers from other teams to get their ham radio license. And I would say at one point there was probably 80 plus ham radio operators in search and rescue that all were licensed.
Was it this event that got Wendell Roby aware of communications, or had they known about you before this? Because I understand Wendell Roby made a huge donation to create a comm truck.
Yeah, my understanding is that they were doing this event and helping with this event probably going way back into the 60s. And yes, in 1982, I believe, Wendell Roby did donate, I think it was $17,000 to the Sheriff's Comm Reserve Volunteer Unit to purchase a new communications vehicle, which they did.
Sheriff's Comm Reserve predated Search and Rescue.
It was a separate little group, and then it ended up folded into Search and Rescue. Yes.
Okay.
So.
So Wendell was a very significant player at that
Absolutely.
point. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Supporter.
Yes.
Your experiences in all of that, are there any highlights that I didn't ask about?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was always a challenge to bring it all together, to find enough volunteers, to schedule everybody, and then to try and, manage it. All the years I was involved, I didn't really work at a particular location. I was pretty much roaming around, going from station to station. So I had been to all these places: Michigan Bluff, Devil's Thumb, Deadwood, Robinson Flat. It was exciting, even deploying the search and rescue repeater at Duncan Peak was quite a challenge, to drive up there and get it going with batteries and solar panel, and all the way down to, nighttime at Auburn Lake Trails, in the dark, making sure everything's working.
These days, without Search and Rescue's participation, do you have any understanding of how that job's getting done?
There are still ham radio organizations, including Sierra Foothills Amateur Radio Club here in Auburn, that volunteer, and I'm sure they still do pretty much the same job that we did. There's a lot of volunteer hams, and there are some, after Search and Rescue stopped doing it, there were search and rescue volunteers that kept doing it. They just
Sure.
wouldn't even wear their search and rescue uniforms
Right.
anymore.
No orange
And
shirts.
some of them are still doing it, yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.